America's Rise to Global Industrial Powerhouse, Part 2. Industrial America in the 20th Century. The dawn of the 20th century witnessed America's transformation into the world's preeminent industrial power. Building on the foundations laid during the late 19th century's Gilded Age, American industry expanded at an unprecedented rate, with manufacturing output increasing by approximately 264% between 1899 and 1929 alone. This industrial expansion reshaped every aspect of American life, from employment patterns to urban development, consumer culture to political movements. The rise of mass production techniques, exemplified by Henry Ford's revolutionary moving assembly line implemented at his Highland Park plant in 1913, dramatically increased productivity while reducing costs. By 1925, Ford's factories were producing a new Model T every 10 seconds, making automobile ownership possible for millions of middle-class Americans. The steel industry formed the backbone of American industrial might during this period. U.S. Steel, formed in 1901 through J.P. Morgan's consolidation of Carnegie Steel and other producers, became the world's first billion-dollar corporation and produced over 60% of American steel by 1910. Steel production increased from 11.4 million tons in 1900 to over 40 million tons by 1920, supplying the essential material for skyscrapers, bridges, railroads, and machinery. Electrical power transformed both manufacturing and daily life. Between 1900 and 1930, electricity consumption increased more than 15-fold as power networks expanded from urban centers to suburban and eventually rural areas. By 1929, approximately 80% of American homes in urban areas had electrical service, powering new appliances from washing machines to refrigerators, vacuum cleaners to radios, fundamentally altering domestic life and consumption patterns. The chemical industry emerged as a critical sector during this period. Companies like DuPont expanded from traditional explosives manufacturing into synthetic materials, developing revolutionary products like nylon, polyester, and numerous plastics that would transform everything from clothing to household goods. By 1939, DuPont's slogan, "Better Things for Better Living," through chemistry reflected the growing importance of chemical innovation in American industrial development. Petroleum became increasingly central to industrial America, with oil production increasing from 63 million barrels in 1900 to over 1 billion barrels by 1929. Initially valuable primarily for kerosene, petroleum's importance grew exponentially with the rise of automobiles, with gasoline consumption increasing from 3 million barrels in 1905 to 344 million barrels by 1930. Companies like Standard Oil, before its 1911 antitrust breakup, Texaco and Gulf Oil developed massive extraction, refining, and distribution networks spanning the continent. The telecommunications industry experienced revolutionary growth and innovation. American Telephone and Telegraph, or AT&T, expanded its network from 3 million telephones in 1900 to over 20 million by 1930. Creating the world's most extensive communications system. Radio broadcasting emerged in the 1920s, with stations increasing from a handful in 1920 to over 600 by 1929, creating new patterns of mass media consumption and national culture. Aviation developed from experimental beginnings to commercial viability during this period. Following the Wright brothers' successful flight in 1903, aircraft production evolved rapidly, accelerated by military requirements during World War I. By the late 1920s, companies like Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed were producing increasingly sophisticated commercial aircraft, while pioneering airlines began offering passenger service, laying the groundwork for the revolution in transportation and logistics that would follow. Industrial expansion required massive capital investments, transforming American financial systems. Investment banking firms like J.P. Morgan and Company played central roles in industrial consolidation and expansion, while commercial banks provided essential financing for both businesses and consumers. The Federal Reserve System, established in 1913, created a more stable financial environment supporting industrial growth. though its policies would later be questioned following the 1929 stock market crash. Labor conflicts intensified as industrialization accelerated. The 1919 steel strike involved over 350,000 workers seeking better wages and working conditions, while the textile industry saw prolonged conflicts in New England and the South throughout the 1920s. The 1921 Battle of Blair Mountain in West Virginia, involving over 10,000 armed coal miners confronting company forces and eventually federal troops, represented one of the largest labor uprisings in American history. Industrial concentration increased dramatically, with the largest 200 corporations controlling approximately 45% of corporate assets by 1929. Despite the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and high-profile cases like the 1911 breakup of Standard Oil, economic consolidation continued through holding companies, interlocking directorates, and various other legal mechanisms that maintained effective control while circumventing regulatory restrictions. Scientific management principles, developed by Frederick Winslow Taylor and expanded by industrial engineers like Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, transformed factory organization and worker supervision. Time-motion studies, standardized procedures, and detailed division of labor increased productivity while often intensifying work pace and reducing worker autonomy. By the 1920s, these management techniques had spread beyond manufacturing to retail, services, and even office work. Industrial innovation increasingly occurs within corporate research laboratories rather than through individual inventors. General Electric established its research laboratory in 1900, while Bell Laboratories, founded in 1925, became perhaps the most productive industrial research facility in history, developing technologies from vacuum tubes to transistors. By 1930, over 1,600 American companies maintained research departments employing more than 30,000 scientists and engineers. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, dramatically accelerated American industrial development. While initially uninvolved, the United States became the primary supplier of war materials to Allied nations before entering the conflict in 1917. Industrial production increased by approximately 32% between 1914 and 1919, as demand stimulated expansion across manufacturing sectors while encouraging standardization and mass production techniques that would transform post-war consumer production. The automobile industry epitomized 20th-century industrialization. Vehicle production increased from 4,000 units in 1900 to over 4.8 million by 1929, transforming transportation, urban development, and consumer culture. By 1929, Americans owned approximately 23 million passenger vehicles, representing over 80% of the world total. The industry directly employed over 447,000 workers, while creating millions of additional jobs in related sectors from rubber to petroleum, glass to highway construction. Industrial urbanization continued as manufacturing centers expanded. Detroit's population more than tripled between 1900 and 1930, growing from 305,000 to over 1.5 million as automobile production concentrated there. Similar growth occurred in industrial centers like Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Los Angeles, creating distinctive regional manufacturing clusters and specialized labor markets. Immigration provided essential labor for industrial expansion, with over 14.5 million immigrants entering the United States between 1900 and 1930, predominantly from Southern and Eastern Europe. Immigrant workers typically occupied the lowest industrial positions, often enduring harsh conditions and discrimination, while gradually building communities and institutions supporting acculturation and eventual mobility. African American industrial employment increased dramatically during the Great Migration as approximately 1.5 million Black Americans moved from southern agricultural regions to northern industrial centers between 1915 and 1930. Initially triggered by labor shortages during World War I, this population movement continued throughout the 1920s despite persistent discrimination that typically confined Black workers to the least desirable and lowest paying positions. Women's industrial employment expanded beyond traditional sectors like textiles and garment manufacturing. During World War I, women entered metalworking, electrical equipment manufacturing, and chemical production in unprecedented numbers. While many left or were forced from these positions following the war, women's workforce participation continued expanding throughout the 1920s, with approximately 2 million women working in manufacturing by 1930. Consumer culture emerged from industrial abundance as mass production made previously luxurious goods increasingly affordable. Installment purchasing expanded dramatically during the 1920s, with approximately 60% of automobiles and 80% of radios purchased on credit by 1929. Advertising expenditures increased from approximately $500 million in 1900 to over $3 billion by 1929, creating new forms of commercial messaging and consumer desire. Environmental consequences of rapid industrialization became increasingly apparent. Air pollution intensified around manufacturing centers, with Pittsburgh's infamous smoke requiring streetlights at midday. Water pollution from industrial waste, particularly from chemical and steel production, severely degraded rivers and lakes, while extractive industries like mining, logging, and oil drilling dramatically altered landscapes across the continent. Occupational health hazards proliferated in industrial workplaces. Silicosis affected approximately half of all miners by the 1930s, while chemical exposure in manufacturing caused numerous ailments from skin diseases to neurological damage. Despite growing awareness of these issues, limited regulatory oversight allowed dangerous conditions to persist, with workers bearing the physical costs of industrial development. Technological unemployment emerged as a significant concern as mechanization eliminated traditional skilled positions. In steel production, continuous rolling mills requiring minimal human intervention replaced processes previously demanding extensive craft knowledge. Similarly, mechanical coal cutters displaced thousands of miners, while automatic telephone switching systems eliminated the need for manual operators. This pattern would accelerate during the Depression years, complicating recovery efforts. Industrial standardization became increasingly central to mass production. Organizations like the American National Standards Institute, founded as the American Engineering Standards Committee in 1918, created uniform specifications for everything from screw threads to electrical components, enabling interchangeability of parts and materials while facilitating complex supply chains across multiple manufacturers. By 1930, thousands of industrial standards had been established, creating a coherent technological infrastructure supporting further innovation. Transportation networks evolved to support industrial development. The national highway system expanded from approximately 150,000 miles of surfaced roads in 1900 to over 700,000 miles by 1930, facilitating truck transportation that increasingly competed with railroads for freight. Inland waterways saw extensive development, with projects like the New York State Barge Canal, completed in 1918, creating efficient shipping routes connecting industrial centers to natural resources and markets. The Great Depression devastated American industry beginning in late 1929. Industrial production declined approximately 45% between 1929 and 1932, with manufacturing output falling to 1913 levels by 1933. Unemployment in manufacturing reached catastrophic levels, with approximately 35% of industrial workers jobless by 1932. Major sectors like steel operated at less than 20% of capacity, while automobile production declined by over 75% between 1929 and 1932. Recovery began under President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, with industrial production increasing approximately 66% between 1933 and 1937, remaining below 1929 levels. The National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933 attempted to stabilize production and employment through industry codes regulating competition and labor practices, while the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 dramatically strengthened workers' collective bargaining rights. Labor organization reached unprecedented levels during the 1930s. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, formed in 1935, organized mass production industries previously considered unorganizable. Membership in labor unions increased from approximately 3 million in 1933 to over 10 million by 1941, fundamentally altering power relationships in American industry and establishing patterns of labor relations that would persist for decades. World War II completed industrial recovery while transforming American manufacturing capacity. Between 1939 and 1945, industrial production increased by approximately 96% as government contracts totaling over $175 billion funded massive expansion. The aviation industry grew from approximately 63,000 workers producing 5,856 aircraft in 1939 to over 1.3 million workers producing 96,318 aircraft in 1944. Exemplifying the extraordinary mobilization that established American industrial supremacy for the post-war era. According to economic historian Robert Gordon, in his work The Rise and Fall of American Growth, this period represented the special century of exceptional economic development from 1870 to 1970 that transformed American living standards and industrial capability at a pace never seen before or since. The industrial foundation established during this remarkable period would sustain American economic preeminence through much of the 20th century. However, manufacturing would later face significant challenges from globalization, automation, and structural economic shifts in the decades following 1970. In the description, you have the references and sources of this material. If you like this type of video, subscribe, like, and click the bell for notifications. Thank you for watching.